This is the moment that changed wrestling forever. Hulk Hogan had been a face for his entire career, and in WCW, he was at the top of the mountain. But in 1996, everything changed. Hogan would become the biggest heel in the company, turning on his own fans and joining forces with his biggest rivals. It was shocking. The Hulkster had officially gone bad. On this day, in 1996, Eric Bischoff's WCW was riding high. They had just beaten the WWF at their own game, taking over the hottest wrestling storylines of the year, including the very popular nWo storyline. But after being suspended for attacking a referee, he was no longer allowed to compete. But Bishop had a plan to bring him back. At the end of the night, Hogan would drop the WCW title to the one and only Ric Flair. This meant that the Nature Boy was back on top once again. But it also meant that Hogan was without a championship for the first time in years. And this is what made his heel turn so believable. And at Bash at the Beach, Rodman would come out and attack DDP, costing him the match and officially turning him heel. Then, as the show went off air, something happened that nobody was expecting. Without this, there would be no WWE, and without the WWE, there would be no wrestling today. In fact, it was so good that it would go on to inspire many other wrestlers over the years. Some would try to copy Hogan's methods, while others would put their own spin on things. But no matter what, all of them were inspired by Hogan's original heel turn. So let's take a moment to appreciate this legendary moment. They won multiple championships, and they had some of the biggest stars in wrestling history. And it all started with that one iconic heel turn. Fans had no idea that he was planning to turn. In fact, they thought he was the biggest babyface in the company. But Hogan surprised them all. He turned heel, and the fans loved it. They had never seen anything like it before. Hogan was so good as a heel that the fans hated him. They booed him relentlessly, and that's when he knew that he had done the right thing. Also, what's your favorite nWo moment? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any of my latest content. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one. He was tired of carrying the company, and now it was time for him to leave. He could do whatever he wanted, and the fans would love it. Hogan was so into his new character that he would often break the fourth wall and talk to the camera. He would brag about his accomplishments, and he would trash talk his opponents. The fans ate it up. They loved to hear him gloat. And Hogan knew that he had found his true calling. It was an epic match, and in the end, Flair would end up winning the title. When he turned heel, he knew that he had made the right decision, and he proved it by becoming one of the most successful heels of all time. He was hated, but he was also loved. The fans couldn't get enough of him. That's why he is one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. This meant that Hogan was without a championship for the first time in years. But that wasn't the only surprise of the night. After the match, Rodman and DDP attacked Hogan. Then out came the rest of the nWo, celebrating with him. And even though they had lost the match, they were still together. But there was someone else standing with them, someone who had just made the biggest heel turn of all time. But he said that he wasn't leaving alone. He would take some friends with him. He was at the top of the mountain as a babyface, but he was getting bored of it. He wanted something more. That's when Eric Bischoff came up with the idea of the nWo. No one expected this. But Hogan wasn't done. He said that he wasn't leaving alone. He would take some friends with him. When the music hit, out came the rest of the nWo. They stood tall and strong as the crowd booed them relentlessly. But Hogan knew that he had done the right thing. He was no longer a babyface. He was now the biggest heel in the industry. And along with Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, they would take WCW and the wrestling world to the next level. He knew that Hogan was a star, but he also knew that he needed some help. So he brought in Kevin Nash and Scott Hall to form the nWo with him. Together, they were unstoppable. They were the hottest thing in WCW, and they were about to take things to the next level. They thought that Hogan was washed up and that his best days were behind him, but they were wrong. Hogan would prove them all wrong. In fact, the nWo would become so popular that they would end up conquering the entire wrestling world. And when the music hit, out came the rest of the nWo. They stood tall and strong as the crowd booed them relentlessly. But Hogan knew that he had done the right thing. He was finally free from WCW, and now he could start his own company. Out came the rest of the nWo celebrating with Hogan, and along with Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, they would take WCW in the wrestling world to the next level. After this, Hogan would go on to conquer WCW. He won multiple championships and became one of the most hated wrestlers of all time. The fans who once cheered him would now boo him relentlessly, and Hogan loved it. He knew that he had finally reached the next level. Even though they had lost the match, they were still together. But there was someone else standing with them, someone who had just made the biggest heel turn of all time. This meant that now Hogan had two huge enemies, Diamond Dallas Page and Rodman. And to defeat them, he would need all the help he could get. They had become the most hated group in the company, and Hogan was the leader. Things couldn't have been better. But behind the scenes, there were problems. The top stars in the company were not happy with their roles. Guys like Sting, Lex Luger, and Ric Flair wanted to be in the main event. Instead, they were stuck in the middle of the card in boring feuds. So they started talking about leaving the company, and that's when Eric Bischoff made them an offer they couldn't refuse. This angle had fans on the edge of their seats, as it seemed like no one was safe from the group. The nWo were led by Hollywood Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, and Scott Hall. Their mission? Take over WCW and take down anyone who stood in their way, and they had slowly been gaining more and more members every week. So now it was July, and the nWo were at the top of the card. In the following weeks, we would see these three babyfaces turn on the nWo and join forces to take them down. But to do this, Hogan needed to be the main focus. And if he was going to capture the championship, then someone else had to step up to the plate, someone who could take the nWo to the next level. Enter Dennis Rodman. Rodman had been a part of the nWo since the beginning. But before he took on both of these men at the same time, he first had to deal with one of the most devastating losses of his career. To make matters worse, after the match, Rodman and Diamond Dallas Page would jump him, further humiliating the Hulkster. After losing the title, Hogan grabbed the microphone and told the crowd that the reason he didn't fight back against Flair, Rodman, and DDP was because he didn't need their help. That's when everything changed. Hulk Hogan was no longer a babyface. He was now the biggest heel in the industry. But it wasn't easy. There were many doubters who thought that the nWo wouldn't be successful. If you think about it, the birth of the nWo was one of the most important moments in wrestling history. The story of how Hulk Hogan turned heel is one of the most iconic in professional wrestling history. When you look back on it, Hogan's heel turn was perfect. Then came the night that changed everything. Hulk Hogan was in the main event, defending his WCW title against Ric Flair. When Hogan grabbed the mic and told the crowd that he was leaving WCW, they were shocked. The nWo would go on to become one of the most successful stables of all time. What's amazing about Hogan's heel turn is that it was completely unexpected. When Hogan turned heel, it opened up a whole new world of possibilities for him. He was no longer the good guy. You'd have to hand it to Hulk Hogan. He knew how to work the crowd. So the next time you're watching a wrestling match and you see a heel turn, remember the man who started it all. Remember the Hulkster. Now what do you think? How would you rate the heel turn of Hulk Hogan?